Winning a war isn't just about numbers or firepower, it's about supply lines, and Ukraine knows this better than anyone. And Ukraine knows exactly where to hit Russia where it hurts the most. Not its tanks or its missiles, but its fuel supply. Oil is the black gold that literally fuels Putin's war machine, funding and powering everything from armored vehicles to fighter jets. So if you take out Russia's oil supply, you cripple its military. And that's exactly what Ukraine is trying to do. Ukraine just delivered one of its most devastating blows yet, knocking out 5% of Russia's oil refining capacity with just a single drone strike. How did they pull it off? Why does it matter? And what does this mean for Ukraine's strategy going forward? Let's break it down. On January 29th, reports began to surface of Ukraine's devastating raid on the Nizhny Novgorod oil refinery located in Kstovo. This vital oil refinery is located deep in central Russia, around 520 miles from the Ukraine war's front lines. The attack was carried out by a small swarm of drones Ukraine sent flying into the Russian skies late in the night of January 28th and into the early hours of the 29th. This was all part of a wider strike, with Ukraine also attacking Tver, Bryansk, and Smolensk with drones that all caused fires and forced Russia's aerial defenses into response mode. However, it was the strike against Kstovo oil depot that was the most effective. The refinery is owned by Lukoil, which is one of Russia's largest oil and gas companies. The company is massive, with over $128 billion in revenue in 2021 alone. But their oil refinery was targeted and taken out by a few small drones, with 4 out of 4 hitting their targets and causing, quote, significant damage. That's according to Ukraine's Military Intelligence Unit, or HUR, which added that the refinery supports the activities of the Russian occupation forces and that the attack took place at around midnight local time. Ukraine's general staff added that the results and the extent of the damage are being clarified. Russia, as always, has remained tight-lipped about the true impact of the strike. Newsweek reports that it has attempted to reach out to the Russian Ministry of Defense via email and received no comment. As for Nizhny Novgorod's governor, Gleb Nikitin, he seems to be in damage control mode. As a result of repelling a UAV, fragments of the drone fell onto the territory of one of the enterprises of the Kshtovskaya industrial zone. Firefighters are currently working to extinguish the fire, he wrote in a Telegram post. Nikitin has also said that the drone attack hadn't caused any casualties. He may be right about that. However, he is clearly lying about the extent of the damage caused to the Kstovo oil refinery. The sheer scale of the fire shown in the brief clips shared by Forbes is enough to prove that this was more than a scrap of destroyed drone causing a small blaze. The refinery was attacked successfully. And the extent of the damage is such that Ukraine may have destroyed 5% of Russia's total oil refining capacity with just 4 drones. Russia should have been prepared for this. After all, January 29th isn't the first time Ukraine has attacked a refinery. It's not even the first time it's gone after this particular one. It also struck Kstovo in March 2024, again with a drone attack. That assault saw some success, inflicting enough damage to cause a temporary shutdown, though it was nowhere near as effective as this most recent attack. Still, it should have been a warning to Russia. Equip this facility with aerial defenses because Ukraine has the refinery in its sights. Putin didn't heed the warning, and now the entire refinery has gone up in flames. So, if they've struck the refinery before, why does this most recent attack matter so much? To answer that question, we first need to understand exactly what the Nizhny Novgorod oil refinery in Kstovo actually does. The Lukoil Kstovo facility is one of the largest oil refineries in Russia. It had been in use for decades before Lukoil took ownership, though, and the refinery's origins date back to Soviet-era Russia, with the construction of the plant being completed in 1958. When the Soviet Union collapsed, the 1990s saw the refinery become privatized. By 1997, its annual output was 12.3 million tons. Then, Lukoil came into the picture. Through shrewd investing, Lukoil became the majority shareholder of the plant, with 80% of the refinery falling under its ownership by 2006. With that ownership came a desire to invest so they could pump out even more oil. New complexes were built, with the plant reaching the point where it had a capacity of 17 million tons of oil by 2024. That massive capacity allows the plant to refine a staggering 13 million barrels of oil, which accounts for around 5% of Russia's total refinery output. So, the Kstovo oil refinery is massive. Or it was massive. Now it's up in smoke and not able to produce oil anymore, or at least it won't be able to produce as much as it had. So what does all this mean for the Ukraine war going forward, and how will it affect Russia as Putin keeps on pushing to take even more Ukrainian territory? First, there's the escalation factor to consider. The attack in Kstovo is far from the first Ukraine has ever conducted against Russia's oil refining industry. In fact, those attacks were a hallmark of the Ukrainian strategy throughout 2024, with almost every month seeming to be marked by at least one drone or missile strike on Russia's oil industry. These refineries were firmly in the Ukrainian crosshairs to the point where it had attacked 30 such installations, damaging around 17% of Russia's oil refining capacity up to that point, including a strike against an oil tank farm in Russia's Rostov Oblast that saw a drone destroy or damage around 70 tanks that could have cost Russia up to $200 million worth of refined oil. Ukraine was carrying out these refinery attacks, at least partially in retaliation for Russia's assaults on its own energy system. The catalog of attacks in the first 6 months of 2024 saw Ukraine hit refineries including the Ust-Luga complex in the Baltic Sea, the Tuapse refinery that produces 240,000 barrels daily, and the Gazprom Neftekhim Salavat facility that produces 130,000 barrels per day. Even as recently as January 24th, Ukraine struck an oil refinery and power station in the Ryazan region of Moscow, another attack that caused massive blazes. All of these were impressive attacks on their own, with each showcasing Ukraine's ability to strike deep into the heart of Russia with its missiles and drones. But the Kstovo attack is different. It's so much larger than anything Ukraine has managed before, and it did it all with just 4 precision-targeted drones. Forbes war correspondent David Axe calls the raid a significant escalation, while noting that Ukraine's actions on Russian oil in January 2025 alone might have cut the country's petroleum production by as much as a tenth. Kstovo wasn't a one-off. It's just the latest and the most damaging oil refinery attack in a string that Ukraine has managed to pull off over the course of at least a year. But why attack these refineries in the first place? Part of the reason comes down to money. Russia spends billions of dollars per year on building and maintaining its oil refineries. In November 2023, it announced that it had plans to invest more than $11 billion into upgrading its existing facilities throughout the country by 2028. That investment, Russia believed, would increase the country's gasoline and diesel production by around 4 million tons, allowing it to produce a total of 30 million tons per year. The plan is to commission and reconstruct 50 refinery processing units for the production of fuel, said Russia's Deputy Prime Minister Alexander Novak at the time. If all $11 billion was earmarked for those 50 refinery units, some quick math tells us that each of those units costs Russia about $220 million. Think about what that means in the context of Ukraine's attacks in Kstovo and elsewhere. The drones it's using to assault Russia's refineries are targeting these types of oil processing units, with each successful strike taking a unit out of commission. That lost unit means reduced oil processing capabilities for Russia, meaning it will naturally want to repair or replace what it's lost as quickly as possible. That creates a twofold problem for Russia. First, a destroyed unit means Russia has to spend up to $220 million on a replacement just to keep its oil refining capacity at current levels. That leads us to the second problem. That money has to come from somewhere. The odds are Russia is being forced to pay for all of those replacement units with the money that it earmarked for building 50 new ones back in 2023. So each destroyed unit not only reduces Russia's oil refining capacity for as long as the unit is offline, but it cuts into planned capacity upgrades in the future. It's a win-win for Ukraine. And those wins become even more remarkable when you consider how little Ukraine is having to spend to carry out these refinery attacks. It's been theorized that Ukraine used the Aeropract A-22 sports plane to carry out its attack on the Kstovo refinery. This drone looks like a small prop plane, measuring a little over 20 feet in length, and it's able to fly at a maximum speed of 126 miles per hour, with a range of 693 miles. That range made it perfect for attacking the Kstovo facility, which was 520 miles away from the Ukraine war's front lines. And it suggests that Ukraine could use this UAV to target installations even deeper into Russia. However, it's the drone's weight-carrying capabilities that make it so effective. Its main U.S. dealer, Lenore Aircraft, says that the UAV can weigh up to 1,320 pounds and still take off. That allows for around 600 pounds of explosives that Ukraine could pack into the UAV's massive cabin, making the Aeropract A-22 a devastatingly powerful force when used as a kamikaze drone. So how much does this drone cost that can cause tens if not hundreds of millions of dollars worth of damage? It's just $130,000 for the drone, plus a few thousand more for the primitive explosives packed into its cabin. Even if we assume what may be a high-end figure of $200,000 per attack drone, the 4 that struck Kstovo likely cost Ukraine less than $1 million, so the financial damage they caused could be hundreds of times their own cost. a good return on investment for Ukraine. And it gets even worse for Russia. It's not just oil refining units that it's losing to Ukrainian drone attacks, it's losing the oil itself, both crude and refined. That's oil Russia could use for two things: making more money to fund its war machine and keeping that machine fueled on the front lines in Ukraine. We'll come back to the front lines issue in a moment, but first let's talk about oil sales and what they mean for Russia. Every refinery attack means Putin loses access to oil that he could have sold abroad. In December 2024 alone, Russia's crude oil and petroleum exports dropped by 40,000 barrels per day compared to November, totaling a monthly loss of 1.24 million barrels. What's interesting is how this loss played out. Crude oil sales plummeted by 250,000 barrels per day, costing Russia $130 million. But petroleum product sales like gasoline and diesel rose by 210,000 barrels per day, slightly offsetting the damage and boosting revenue by $550 million. Essentially, Russia is exporting fewer barrels but making more money by refining crude into higher-value petroleum products. And that's exactly why Ukraine is targeting refineries. Unlike crude oil, refined petroleum requires functioning processing plants, and those plants are now going up in flames. By crippling Russia's refining capacity, Ukraine is cutting off its most profitable oil exports, ensuring that these recent revenue gains won't last. This isn't random. Ukraine knows Russia depends on petroleum exports to fund its war, and it's systematically dismantling that revenue stream. There's strong evidence to suggest this was the plan all along. For example, we mentioned Ukraine's previous attack on the Kstovo refinery in March 2024, along with its many other attacks on refineries throughout the first half of 2024. Those attacks clearly had an effect on Russian oil sales. In May 2024, Bloomberg reported that shipments of diesel, another refined oil product, from Russian ports had declined notably since January 2024. That month was a bumper one, seeing Russia export about 1.2 million barrels of diesel per day. By February, a month after Ukraine started its concerted oil refinery campaign, that number had dropped to a little over 1 million barrels per day. Still well within Russia's norms, but by March 2024, diesel sales were down to around 800,000 barrels per day, which was the lowest they'd been since at least January 2021. Shipments certainly didn't stop, but a decline of about 400,000 barrels between January and March 2024, likely due to Ukraine's drone strikes, is massive. Diesel costs $266.30 per barrel at the time of creating this video. Multiply that by 400,000 lost barrels daily, and then multiply the result by 31 days in March, and you get a loss of $3.3 billion in the space of a couple of months. Massive for Russia, that's doing everything it can to keep money rolling in to fund its war effort. Fast forward to January 2025, and the losses just keep on coming. Reuters reported on January 7th that Russia's seaborne exports of all of its oil products fell by 9.1% in 2024 when compared to 2023. It still managed to export 113.7 million metric tons of its most valuable resource, but the Ukrainian drone attacks clearly took their toll. Russia's oil refining capacity also dropped to 267 million metric tons in 2024, its lowest level since 2012. And now Russia has just lost 5% of its refining capacity thanks to the Kstovo drone attack. That means we're likely to see more of these attacks in the future. But the biggest impact of this attack isn't on Russia's bank account, it's that it's tightened the noose around the already strangled neck of the Russian military. Every refinery attack not only reduces the amount of petroleum and diesel Russia can sell to other countries, but it also limits the amount of these valuable fuels that it can send to the front lines in Ukraine. Every refinery strike means less petroleum, gasoline, and airplane kerosene making its way onto the front lines. The Carnegie Endowment notes that the cascade damage caused by strikes such as those in Kstovo cause problems for Russia's fighting capacity. Less available fuel also means problems economically, as we've already mentioned, and issues for Russians who aren't even fighting in Ukraine. After all, the average Russian needs gasoline or diesel to fuel cars. It's likely that much of the manufacturing equipment Russia uses to build its weapons needs the same refined oil products. And more directly, tanks and armored vehicles on the front lines of the war need this fuel to go anywhere. If supplies are being cut off, Putin is increasingly forced to send his soldiers to assault Ukraine's defenses on foot in human wave attacks without any armor units to protect them against the hail of artillery fire and terrifying drone assaults those soldiers face. The net result? More casualties for a country that already has lost over 837,000 of its soldiers, according to Ukraine's figures, and is struggling with manpower issues. So, the Kstovo attack is yet another, albeit the most impressive and damaging example of Ukraine placing Putin into a catch-22 situation. Does Russia focus on selling as much of its refined oil products as possible to keep money flowing into the country? It could. That would at least allow Putin to prop up his country's ailing economy for a little longer as the weight of the sanctions bear down on Russia. However, doing that means committing to using less of that refined fuel for Russia's soldiers on the front lines and even the country's regular people. Can Putin afford to do that? Every stalled-out tank and armored vehicle that can't move because it has no fuel ultimately leads to Russia's casualty rate increasing. And if Putin starts taking oil from everyday people, he risks creating unrest that could also lead to an internal push for him to end the war in Ukraine. Ukraine knows all of this, and that's why the attack on Kstovo was so ingenious. On the surface, that attack is impressive enough due to taking out 5% of Russia's refined oil manufacturing capacity. But digging deeper shows us that this attack and the general targeting of Russia's refining throughout 2024 is creating some serious economic, military, and morale problems in Russia while relieving pressure on Ukraine's troops on the front lines. This isn't just a now problem for Putin. If Ukraine keeps up its attacks, it could become a forever problem for Russia and its war-hungry leader. But what do you think about what happened in Kstovo? How badly will losing up to 5% of its oil refining capacity affect Russia as the Ukraine war moves deeper into 2025? How much damage do you think Ukraine will do to Russia's oil refineries this year? Share your thoughts in the comments, and thank you for watching this video.